At this time, Art is going to provide us for, a bit of meditation.
This is to address in some ways the sharings, and it's a healing meditation from someone named Lydia Walker that I learned a long time ago. And it goes like this. I'll sing it through once. It's a chant, and I invite you to join me as you wish, especially since you're in your own home. No one will hear you if you don't think you can sing. My philosophy is anyone can sing if they dare to. I am a circle, I am healing you. You are a circle, you are healing me. Unite us, make us one. Unite us, make us one. I am a circle, I am healing you. You are a circle, you are healing me. Unite us, make us one. Unite us, make us one. I am a circle, I am healing you. You are a circle, you are healing me. Unite us, make us one. Unite us, make us one.
I guess are we on?
Yes.
Oh, okay. We muted ourselves so we could chant. Just a reminder, the church expenses do continue. If you could send your offerings and pledges to the church at 960 Barnett, either by mail or simply taking them over and slipping in through the mail slot in the front door, it would be appreciated very much. At this time, Art is going to speak to us about spirituality for the Theologically Challenged. It sounds interesting.
A storm was raging at sea, and the captain saw that his small ship was sinking. He called over this roar of the waves, "Does anyone aboard know how to pray?" One sailor stepped forward and said, "Aye, Captain, I know how to pray." "Good," said the captain, "you pray, while the rest of us don our life jackets. We're one jacket short." Spirituality, my friends, may or may not involve prayer, but definitely not as a substitute for a life jacket on a sinking ship. Nor is it a substitute for rational thinking, or an excuse for navel gazing, or avoidance of social justice responsibilities. Most of us may feel that we know exactly what spirituality is not. Indeed, the term may make us feel uncomfortable. I invite us all to rest any defenses and be open to the possibility, the potential for discovering a spirituality, if we wish, and if so, which we decide is real, helpful, comforting, maybe even challenging. And let us be open to what I like to call the great possibility of what might happen when we are gathered on Sunday morning for, quote, spiritual seeking, end quote. We, who we now are called the nuns, and no, I don't mean those spiritual sisters, N-U-N-S. No, we are the nuns of the Nun of the Above. Those people that when they get the list of religions you're supposed to check off on those forms, more and more of us for medical reasons, we check off none of the above, because usually they don't list Unitarian Universalist. One of my first sermons when I came to San Antonio as minister in 1991 was titled, "Let's Get Spiritual." And I found out later that many people considered that to have been brave of me. Remember, this was 1991, because it was such a humanist church, evidently. Well, I want to tell you, it had nothing to do with bravery. It had to do with sharing my religious journey with them, because I hoped we would be journeying for a long time together, and I wanted to let them know who I was and where I was going, what I was thinking, what I was feeling. And I describe myself, as I still do, as a mystical or spiritual humanist, realizing that basically I could probably just describe myself comfortably now as a transcendentalist, although that still is confusing to most people. And as the readings mentioned earlier by Mike, that I had led workshops on exploring spirituality that I really enjoyed at those summer institutes in the 1990s. It was the first time in a long time I was told that the word spirituality was used in many of those summer institutes, believe it or not. It was a very humanist time, and humanism can be divided into two camps, if you will. What I call the ardent humanists that believed in very rational thinking and didn't like the word spiritual, and the spiritual humanists who did. Well, one of those ardent, ultra-rational humanists actually criticized my running a workshop on exploring spirituality. And I thought that was very you and had somewhat of an argument with that person. Here are some more of the definitions. Spirituality, said Joanne Parker, is, quote, when I stop, I listen. I try, even when it seems there's nothing there. When I let the walls down, even just a little bit. When I feel myself part of a whole, W-H-O-L-E, a community, an environment, while retaining my sense of myself. And of course, I would write my definitions as well. Here are two of mine. Spirituality is one of those slippery words, hard to get a hold of exactly. It is the religious connection of you, me, and the universe into a realized oneness. It is having been lost and feeling an overwhelming sensation that now we are found. Spirituality is that feeling I get when I sing or even hear the song Amazing Grace, or other special songs that move me emotionally. Second definition. Spirituality is a feeling, an intuition, a hunch, maybe even a hope that the spirit within is connecting with the spirit in the wider world. It is the profoundest feeling of all of having been moved and motivated by the holy, by the higher power, end quote. And one of my colleagues who took the workshop, who was the minister in Beaumont, Texas, Walter Moulton, now gone from us. Walter was from Maine and had that Maine accent that was unmistakable. And he always tried to talk a little bit in a Texas twang since he was from Beaumont, but it always came out as a Maine accent. It was wonderful. But this is what he said. Spirituality is what grows on me when I contemplate deeply the magnificence of birth, the meaning of life, and the mystery of death, while being deeply aware of my relationship to the earth and other people, end quote. And finally, another participant, Marcia Landry, who was also a poet, wrote this in poetry form: spirituality is earth path that unfolds for our feet to walk as we move through life with unceasing discovery, the fountain within that flows, fresh water once we find it, and understand how to drink with our hearts, fresh air that we breathe in deep gasps that relieve tightness, freeing our minds from deep space, from small spaces, to flow with wind and open sky, energy that touches us always, on hot skin at home and cool face at night. We feel it as it passes through us, connecting our spirits always to all else, end quote. I'm currently reading a book which I would recommend highly by Lee Eric Schmidt, a Princeton University professor of religion, titled Restless Souls: The Making of American Spirituality, from Emerson to Oprah. And after 30 years in ministry and reading of UU history and many, many books that I found spiritual, this book is still full of new and fascinating information and spirituality, but especially on Unitarian Universalist people, ministers and lay people alike, as well as many other liberal and universal writers and seekers of spirituality and mysticism from all religions. It would make a great adult education course, folks, or a reading group, even on Zoom. Another one of my early spirituality sermons was titled Spirituality for the Open-Minded Agnostic. I did not intend to be exclusive, of course, but just the opposite. I might have called it Spirituality for the Open-Minded Humanist, or perhaps even better, Spirituality for All. I was originally going to call it Spirituality for Atheists, but I believe that one does not have to believe in the traditional supreme being to be spiritual, nor does one have to not believe in the supreme being to be spiritual. And yet sometimes that term atheist, well, it bothers me, you see, because it sounds to me somewhat close-minded, like someone has already made up their mind not to believe something, or to be open to the possibility of religious change, or even evolution or revelation. Our theological diversity, reflected both in our denomination and to most of our particular churches, is sometimes strained to the point of breaking when we feel misunderstood, left out, or even worse, put down. The most obvious example of this is how we deal with those of us who sometimes describe ourselves as Unitarian Universalist Christians. We often hear put downs and disrespectful comments, especially not thinking that anyone would be offended. Indeed, many people who hold UU Christian beliefs may not dare to admit it for that very reason. And I find I am becoming much more interested in what we have in common with traditional religions of all stripe, so that I can find paths to share with other faiths, rather than how we are so great because we are so different. So for some of us, talking about spirituality may be difficult or even confusing. We may find ourselves feeling defensive. But like the 12-step recovery programs of AA, before we can find spirituality, we have to let go of our defenses and admit that we just can't handle everything alone. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to depend on an outside force separate from ourselves. The religious writer, another one I highly recommend, Sam Keen, in his book, which has a title that sounds very Unitarian Universalist-like, Hymns to an Unknown God, Awakening the Spirit in Everyday Life. Spirituality, or the soulful path, he writes, is the quest to discover our higher selves and explain the depths to allow ourselves to be moved, animated, inspired, and explore to that sacred no thing that keeps us human, the unknown God within whom we live and move and have our being, but may never fully comprehend. End quote. Spirituality, you see, is comfortable with an unknown God. That is, one does not have to believe a certain way to experience the spiritual. And it sure helps to be open-minded about possible agnosticism, just as we must be open-minded if we have a theistic approach. Quote, the animating principle in a human being is the spiritual instinct, argues Keen. The impulse to go beyond the ego, to explore the heights and the depths, to connect our individual life with something beyond the self, something more everlasting, even if ever changing, than the self. Ultimately, our self-esteem comes from our discovery of a purposeful source of deathless meaning that transcends the self, end quote. The Buddhists call spirituality shamatha, or tranquil abiding. Isn't that a lovely term? Tranquil abiding. And I believe that part of spirituality is somewhat mystical, though not irrational or illogical, and is related to the Buddhist idea of emptying of the ego, to the opening of our hearts and minds to let that spirit of life, love, and happiness shine through. It is the emptying of resistance, denial, defensiveness, and cynicism. It is a religious aha experience. It is, I think, to be in awe, wonder, and delight like a little child again. And as I said, it is neither rational nor irrational, but I agree with my colleague Forrester Church, who came up with the term trans-rational. And our third principle, of course, of our sacred seven is the acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. And I want to point out that that is controversial for two reasons. I have observed in serving many of our congregation over more than 30 years of ministry that it is often difficult for us to accept people with whom we disagree, especially religiously and politically. And many of our very rational folk who consider themselves atheists, rationalists, have no use for spirituality. And that's okay. I invite us all to take a deep breath and relax and open our hearts and minds. And then if we feel so inclined, to perhaps even go on and experience spirituality. One of our former presidents of the UUA and also the former executive director for Amnesty International USA, Bill Schultz, says, spirituality is not just for what someone has called bliss ninnies, but it's also inspiration for working for social justice. And in his book called Finding Time and Other Delicacies, written while he was president, under a section called A Consumer's Guide to Responsible Spirituality, he says, if I were forced to define spirituality in a single phrase, I would call it our experience of the profound. Not our beliefs about meaning, death, hope, suffering, and the nature of creation, or the design of the divine, but our experiential response to those realities, end quote. So, for atheists, humanists, agnostics, maybe even Gnostics, which might be described as nature-centered, maybe even pagans and Wiccans, the idea of a spirit was more understandable or perhaps less threatening. Indeed, I think that most people today are less interested in theological pigeonholes and more interested in just exploring religion, spirituality, worship, community. For whatever reason, in whatever latter part of this century, I'm sorry, that was aged. In the early part of this century, we begin to hear the word spirituality, some of where was not allowed to even use the G word, if you remember those times. And I find it interesting to note that recent translations of words that the Native American term Great Spirit are now being encouraged to use the term Great Mystery instead. It sounds like the stories of people's religious journeys which have brought them to this church, doesn't it? We need a new language for religion and here and in other Unitarian churches and fellowships, because I believe we are crafting a new language so that we may once more speak religion in church and not offend or confuse people, and in the home, the workplace, perhaps even the schools. A kind of religious Esperanto, a language that was invented in the last century for universal speaking, though it never caught on, unfortunately. Perhaps spirituality is that new universal religious language, which might also serve to bring our theological diversity together. It seems to me that spirituality is a word, an experience that we intuit more than we know or understand. It is what I call a religious gut feeling. It can be inspirational, the very breath of breath. The air in Greek, after all, is pneuma, P-N-E-U-M-A, like the word pneumatic. And it means spirit, or a kind of holy air or breath, without which, of course, we can't live. Or read psychology, like Carl Jung, himself very spiritual and mystical, who said, "All my writings may be considered tasks imposed from within. Their source was a fateful compassion. What I wrote were things that assailed me from within myself. I permitted the spirit that moved me to speak out," end quote. Part of my spiritual practice is reading, and I have found inspiration from a wide variety of ancient and contemporary sources, from all religions, history, as well as all forms of literature like poetry and novels, biographies. The birth of our children can be an incredible experience spiritually, perhaps the most profound of all. Now, I will be the first to admit I wasn't really sure that I wanted to be in the delivery room when my 3 daughters were born. But all 3 births were incredible spiritual experiences. Now, I know I had the easy part, and I'll be the first to admit that as well. But so too, as many of us know, death is a spiritual experience for our loved ones. When a loved one passes away, we are deeply affected and all sorts of feelings run through us. The grief feels overwhelming. We cry until we can cry no longer. And even then we are not done, for we will cry for years afterwards. The memorial service, if it is done right, is a deeply spiritual experience. And as I said, and was not kidding, when our 4-legged animal members of our family dies, it is time for grief as well. And our 4-legged animal members are spiritual to us as well. But after death, a calm may come upon us, and we realize that we will make it through this. And there is a spiritual dimension to our feelings of life and the bittersweetness of love and life. Of the essence, the memory remains with us for as long as we live. And we find ourselves connected with the great and mysterious cycle of life from birth to death. One of my favorite Rumi poems from Sufism, the mystical element of Islam, and of course, for that reason, is often considered heretical to the more conservative Islamics, is called Love Dogs. And I wrote what I call a God poem in response to it. So I'll read the first poem by Rumi called Love Dogs, and then my poem in response. Love Dogs. One night a man was crying, Allah, Allah. His lips grew sweet with praising, until a cynic said, so I've heard you calling out, but have you gotten any response? The man had no answer to that. He quit praying and fell into a confused sleep. He dreamed he saw Kidra, the guide of souls, in the thick green foliage. Why did you stop praising? Because I've never heard anything back. This longing you express is the return message. The grief you cry out from draws you toward union. Your pure sadness that wants help is the secret cup. Listen to the moan of a dog for its master. That whining is the connection. There are love dogs no one knows the names of. Give your life to be one of them. End quote. Isn't that wonderful? Imagine this longing you express is the return message. So my poem, titled, Would It Be Better Not to Use God's Name When Praying? The great Sufi poet Rumi writes in his mystical God poem, Love Dogs, about praying. This longing you express is the return message. What could that mean? That God is the prayer or the praying? Would it be better not to use God's name when praying? Would it help to pretend atheism, to trick the spiritual consciousness into giving up its favorite idolatry of believing in God? Would the mystic connection be baggage too heavy to carry on the journey towards the one? Be neither worshiper of the finger pointing at the moon, nor the worshiper of institutions. Be not just a solver of sacred riddles, but be patient until all the pieces of the puzzle you think is named God are found and joined. One name for God is yours. If your name is love, that's the one I choose. Let me repeat that, for a poem always needs to be read twice. The title is, Would It Be Better Not to Use God's Name When Praying? The great Sufi poet Rumi writes in the mystical God poem, Love Dogs, about praying. This longing you express is the return message. What could that mean? That God is the prayer or the praying? Would it be better not to use God's name when praying? Would it help to pretend atheism? To trick the spiritual consciousness into giving up its favorite idolatry of believing in God? Would the mystic connection be baggage too heavy to carry on the journey towards the one? Be neither worshiper of the finger pointing at the moon, nor the worshiper of institutions. Be not just a solver of sacred riddles, but be patient until all the pieces of the puzzle you think is named God are found and joined. One name for God is yours. If your name is love, that's the one I choose. I believe that we want more than intellectual stimulation from our Sunday mornings. That we may want at least that, but deep within us, deeper than perhaps most of us even realize, lies the urge for the expression of inner feelings and beings, the need to love and be loved, appreciated, perhaps even to be hugged. We yearn in our hearts for more than our minds to be stimulated, but for a balance. May we find what we seek even as we keep seeking. Amen. Shalom, which is peace in Hebrew. Assalamu alaikum, which is peace, and peace be upon you in Arabic. Abrazos a todos, hugs all around in Spanish. Namaste. The Hindu greeting of the divine within me greets the divine within you. Blessed be. Vaya con Dios in Spanish is goodbye, but means go with God. And so I add the adjective for your, which is su. Vaya con su Dios. Go with your idea of God. May it be also. Thank you. For a closing song.
Wait a minute, we want to talk back to you a little bit.
Oh,
maybe.
Yeah, we generally like that here.
Yeah, I can't just lay there and be not responded to. Step up. Who's got something to say about this? I think it was well done and well presented. I enjoyed that.
thank you.
Gave me some. It put words to something that I'm having difficulty putting words to, and I appreciate that.
All right,
Okay.
David, I've got. There you go.
I found it a really good sermon, and I was very, very interested in what you said. Out of it all, what stuck to me was maybe a little too intellectual a piece, but when you said that the spiritual is the experience of the profound, to me that really catches something important. Hard to put into words by definition, and so anyway, I'm not really pondering that. But I wanted to say also, and I should have said this in the sharing of joys and concerns, when we met together a week ago outdoors without masks, and I had this joy, this profound joy about that service. And to me, that was very spiritual and unpretentious, but wonderful. And so to me, moments like that are the spiritual, I think.
Yeah, I think that I think a lot of our spirituality, David, does tend towards the intellectual. We can't help it. And I think it's one of the reasons why I like Emerson so much, because there is that balance. At the same time, sometimes I find it too hard to read Emerson because he's so intellectual. So there's always that balance. Yeah.
All right, and Jill.
One of my favorite old poems that I think before I was even writing poetry myself was Barter by Sarah Teasdale. And I think it is and look it up and read the whole poem, because I think it's the essence of a lot of what Art's talking about. But the first line is, life has loveliness to sell,
Yes.
and never count the cost. And the last line is, and for a breath of ecstasy, give all you have been or can be. And Google the poem, because it's so, language is so beautiful. It's about gratitude.
Yes.
And I think that's what spirituality is. It's about gratitude.
Anyone else? Mari, go 1 second here.
I've been present at my first grandchild's birth and at Dwight's death. And those moments are embedded in you, a deep kind of memory. When Dwight died, when he first died, and I knew he was dead, I was pretty practical. We have to call hospice, we have to do this, we have to do that, because it wasn't unexpected. And then about half an hour, 20 minutes later, when Wright's funeral home came, and I was back in the living room talking to somebody, and then came back into the room, and they had put him on a gurney and had him in a wrapping, some kind of, and there was a zipper, and they had zipped it up. On seeing me, they unzipped it so that I could view him if I wanted to. And at that moment, all by myself, I mean, these men just sort of disappeared in my mind, was when I truly realized he was dead. And that kind of, it was almost like he rose. He rose, if you want to use those words, those Christian words, he rose from the dead. He left at that moment in a different way from that he left when I first viewed him dead. The baby was the opposite of that. The baby emerged. The baby arrived. And putting those two things together, and I call myself a religious humanist, and I'll have to explore that with myself and with you. I like this idea of a spiritual humanist, but it's not quite right for me. A religious humanist seems broader, bigger, encompassing, to encompass more. But thank you for the sermon. It was wonderful and evoked a lot of thoughts.
Thanks. Yeah, I have found doing, as you can imagine, over 30 years, countless memorial services, and including both my parents and my brother. The spiritual depth of those, and the way I was able to do my parents and my brother was to stay in the role of minister while I was doing it. And afterwards, then being able to cry. And when I think about it now, tear up, but, and the example that I think of is when my mother died in January, and in New Hampshire, that means the ground is frozen. And so you can't have a burial. And so the body is put in a crypt until the spring or whatever. And so we were going to have the graveside actually in July, because I couldn't get back up there until July. And my sister said, the graveside is just going to be for the family, Art. So she said, I don't know how to put this delicately, so I'll just say it. At the graveside, we want you to be just Art. and I understood exactly what she meant, and I assured her that she had put that the best way she could, and that that was fine. And I found at the graveyard I could barely speak. I was crying so much because I could just be Art. So that was the difference. And again, a very spiritual experience,
Anyone else?
All right. Thanks to you all. And again, thank you, Art. We appreciate it.
Okay, let me, for the closing song, I have another chant. This is from the Rajneesh Foundation. And we taught this to our kids. It's a calming chant. And I was originally taught it as well as a calming for calming, etc. And one of the ways they used it, and they said, this is a good chant to learn for yourself when you're stuck in traffic. And so we used it with our family for the kids when we were traveling. When the kids were little and they'd start fighting in the back seat, my wife and I would start singing this to try to get them to calm down, etc. And every once in a while, it would come back to haunt me, because when we'd be stuck in traffic and I would start getting, upset, the kids would start singing it to me. So it comes around, but it's one of those things that the kids still use sometimes with their kids now. So it really is, to me, wonderful. And again, I will sing it through once and repeat it and invite you to share it, etc. We are traveling on a journey to nowhere, taking it easy, taking it slow. No more worry, not even a hurry, nothing to carry, let it all go. We are traveling on a journey to nowhere, taking it easy, taking it slow. No more worry, not even a hurry, nothing to carry, let it all go. We are traveling on a journey to nowhere, taking it easy, taking it slow. No more worry, not even a hurry, nothing to carry, let it all go.
I'm going to try to remember that. Thank you. I need that sometimes too. Let us extinguish our chalice at this time. When we take fire from our chalice, it does not have to become less. It can become more. When we take its light and warmth with us, we multiply its power by all of our lives. And then we share it with the world. Thank you all for coming. Thanks again to Art. Namaste.
Okay, and that recording is done. Let me set everybody to unmute. I realized earlier when I was having connection problems, I should have blamed it on the 30-minute lag from Mars.
I love it.
Right, and that's what was making it, because there's not enough oxygen on Mars.
Yeah, that too.
I just looked up a little bit about Sarah Teasdale, and she died in 1933, so that poem would have been written in the early part of the 20th century. And I misquoted, I had the lines kind of in the wrong place, but you get the gist. Look up the poem.
Yeah.
What was the name of the poem?
Barter.
Barter? Barter?
Barter, like you're making a trade, you're bartering, you're dealing, barter. In other words, she's talking about the trades you make, the deals you make as you make your way in the world to really get the best out of it. I think that's how I interpret the title.
Thank you.
And it's just, it's so beautiful. The language of it is so beautiful and so visual. I've now gotten inspiration. I'm going to illustrate this poem. I'm going to do some kind of photo collage or something. So watch for that after we move.
I just wanted to share, I didn't do it during Joys and Concerns. It's somewhat of a concern, but it's a joy as well. I had put off getting my second shingles shot because of COVID. I took the COVID and they didn't want me to do the shingles. So I went and took that and spent the next day in bed. Just to let you know, the COVID shots were a piece of cake compared to my shingles shot.
Oh, no.
That shot didn't bother us at all. We were fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, my whole arm was swollen and red, and I thought, oh, geez, enough already.
Sorry.
Oh, well, thank you for the sorry. I really need